All right, welcome everybody to Delray Artisans presents The Unseen. So there's a gallery exhibit in Delray, Alexandria, and as part of this, I've invited weird people to talk about weird things that are kind of relevant to the unseen. So today I'd like to introduce my friend Matt Hansen, who is a collector of weird things and weird experiences. In addition to his experience going into weird places, he also has a pilot's license. He also has a Coast Guard's boat captain's license, a ham radio license, and a CPA, which is not exactly what you think it is, but it's really a certified analytics professional. So he is not going to do your taxes, no matter how much you pay him. And perhaps most importantly, Matt Hansen has a 23-year-old cat named Geronimo, who might come and irritate us throughout the presentation. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Matt.
Awesome. Thanks, Erica.
And I'll mute myself.
Geronimo is extremely loud. So if you hear like a cat screaming, he's, that's just normal. So we'll see. So thanks for that great introduction. And what I'd like to say here is that, feel free to interrupt me at any point if there's anything you want to discuss here, because we are here to discuss weird shit and we are absolutely all about going down rabbit holes. And yes, 23 years old, it is nuts. So it's amazing he's still alive. So anyway, I'm here to talk to you today about the tenuously connected to hidden worlds topics of ice and deep diving. So without further ado, I'm going to try to share the screen. Let's see if this works out.
It did last time.
Look at that. How's that coming along?
That looks great.
Awesome. So yeah, and some of these photos are good. Some of them are not great. I'm trying to get better about taking good pictures, but yeah. So that's something I'll talk about a little bit. So, I think a lot of people are obviously familiar with scuba diving. It's a phenomenal hobby. I've wanted to do it for I'd wanted to do it for a long time. Grew up in actually quite a lot of my early years were in Indonesia, where there's a ton of interesting scuba diving there. I had never done it though before a few years ago when my partner was like, the reefs are dying, we need to get scuba certified and go see them. So we went to Indonesia, we had a great time. Basically I would say she took the reasonable approach of getting all these scuba certifications that allow you to actually do kind of the interesting stuff and see the cool fish and everything. I took it in a pretty different direction and got all the weird ass certifications because of my, as you can tell from Erica's description, I have a profound need for external validation. And so, we're going to talk about two of those areas. So this picture is actually of my instructor, Bob Thorpe, who he and I went diving under some ice in Michigan. And so if you would ask the question of why would anyone ever want to dive under ice, we're going to delve into that. And spoiler alert, I don't have a great answer, but whatever. This is about weird shit. So let's see if I can figure out how. There we go. So yeah. So again, topics split up into ice diving and then deep diving. One thing I'll say is in the kind of the world of these more extreme and bizarre forms of diving, the other area that people do is caves. I have not gotten into that. I have a couple of friends who are cave divers, but I don't know anything about that topic, so I'm not really going to address it. But people keep telling me about this amazing kind of documentary about the rescue of those kids in Thailand. So apparently that's very good. I have actually not watched it, but I hear it's really good. So instead, we're going to talk about, like I said, ice diving and deep diving. Ice diving first. So so first off, and we're going to kind of present this from like what makes this different from the kind of scuba diving that reasonable people do, and why would you do this, and so on. And then in terms of like what are the additional hazards and so on that might be at least tenuously connected to the hidden worlds thing. So, again, ice diving, we're talking here about basically cutting a hole in the ice, going down into it, and then swimming around and, and looking at the bottom, looking at the ice from the underside, looking at things on the bottom underneath the ice. So what are the hazards of that? First, obviously, you can get lost. So you see that yellow rope that Bob's got there. That's so that remains attached to you. And so you try to mitigate that hazard. It's really, really cold, obviously. It's actually, when this picture was taken, the air temperature was like 5 degrees. So you're in that really unfortunate situation where you actually want to get in the water to warm yourself up, because the water obviously is going to be above freezing. The water is about 35 degrees or so. And so yeah, exactly. I see Erica's reaction here, which is the reaction of any reasonable person there. Yeah, you actually feel warmer in there. And then when you get out of the water, and basically people have to sort of like haul you up and drag you out of that little hole there. The big problem is they have to kind of strip the equipment off you immediately, because otherwise the equipment will actually freeze onto you. And so the really unpleasant part is actually not the water, it's the air. The other thing is, if you remember your basic physics, right? So we've got this tank on the back, on your back, that has a bunch of compressed air in it. So the air that's in the tank is at give or take 3,000 psi, and it has to get down to a few tens of psi depending on the depth you're at. So that means that basically the air all that scuba apparatus is designed to meter out little bits of air and do it at the ambient pressure as opposed to the very high pressure in the tank that you're carrying there. So that's what all that gear, you can kind of see like right behind Bob's head, that's what all that gear is eventually doing. It eventually gets to his mouth in the regulator. So for the physics people here, and I apologize, I'm not good at physics, but I'll try to explain it. That means that the gas there is expanding. So that means the temperature is going down, which means, and the temperature, right, is already really close to freezing in this water. So that means that actually the regulator can freeze, luckily open. It won't freeze closed and not give you any gas, but it can freeze open and just start basically spraying a bunch of air into your mouth. So that kind of presents this third unusual hazard of regulator failure. So yeah, like we talked about, right, here's kind of I think this was and of course, like when I take photos, right, you see the coolest 1% of the photos. So I have 99 additional terrible photos if anyone ever wants to see those. But I thought this one was a pretty cool one of like, kind of illustrating the fundamental ice diving issue, right? Like you need to have a way to get back to that hole to get out there. This was actually a really good day in that, like, you can see this kind of like light from God leading you out to the path there. I've also dived in really shitty ice diving conditions where you can't really see anything, and pretty much the only way to get out is to grab that tether and just like pull yourself back out. So there's that. Yeah. So then on that topic of the cold, yeah, exactly. Being cold does suck, agreed. So the way to slightly mitigate that is to wear a dry suit. So ordinarily you wear a wetsuit, right, with scuba diving. With a dry suit, you're actually wearing this dry suit that then you basically wear. Actually, this fabric that I'm wearing right now is really good because a dry suit is never actually a dry suit. It's a slightly less wet suit because inevitably there are leaks and you sweat a ton and you end up building up a bunch of moisture inside this kind of like sausage casing that you've encased yourself in. And so you end up developing all this moisture kind of inside that dry suit that does make you cold. But luckily, if you go and buy the merino wool fabrics from REI or something like that, which, as opposed to paying the like hundreds and hundreds of dollars for the diving specific fabrics, but if you just go and buy the ones from REI, merino wool will keep you 50% as warm wet as it will dry. So you're basically wearing that underneath and then trying your best to keep this dry suit sealed over you. The day when I took these photos, I actually did not dive anymore because I did have a dry suit flood and water ended up pouring down through my neck and just like absolutely covering my torso. So that was kind of spectacular. And then I decided to take pictures the rest of the day as opposed to doing more dives. see here. And yeah, like I mentioned, here, you have a redundant gas supply. So what you're seeing here is actually not not the problem I described there. Those little bubbles floating up from the regulator that's in my mouth, that's just pure like the equipment was broken before I got in the water, and so it's not catastrophically broken, but like there's a few bubbles coming up there. But yeah, that regulator failure that I mentioned, that can really cause just this massive amount of bubbles just shooting up there. And the real problem there, right, is like you've got this tank, and by the time the tank runs out of gas, you need to be back at that exit hole, right, or you're not going to have anything to breathe. And if the regulator is vomiting tons of gas out there, then you're not going to have anything to breathe, and it's a pretty bad day if you're under the ice. So what people typically do here is they carry multiple tanks and multiple regulators, so that inevitably, when one fails, you have the other one that has enough gas so that you can exit the hole under the ice. We're surely getting to the point where people are asking the very reasonable question: why the fuck would anyone do this? And what is going on here? This is another picture from that day that kind of shows how good how much fun the conditions were. I will say the ice is shockingly cool to see. And I would use that same term that I think one of the Apollo astronauts did about the moon, of talking about this idea of magnificent desolation, right? This whole idea that it is very desolate, and the ice actually is quite beautiful. And if yes, and Erica, that is a fucking chainsaw. That is exactly how you cut the ice. And if I can tell one story about that too. The first time I went ice diving, it turned out that the ice was 2 feet thick and the chainsaw blade was 18 inches long. So those of you who have a math background are already seeing where this story is going. And you cut out this hole in the ice, and you still have 6 inches left to go. So he ended up finding a pipe that was laying around and basically banging on it until eventually the ice kind of slipped free, and we were able, pretty much with the pipe, just managed to stop it down. At the time, I wasn't really paying attention though, so I basically had my dry suit, because it's kind of a pain in the ass to wear. So I had my dry suit around my waist. And that meant when I was using the chainsaw, all these ice shavings just ended up landing all over my merino wool and making me completely wet before I even got in the water. So, that was a good time. To Tony's question, actually, this is a very popular snowmobiling location. This, by the way, is in middle of nowhere, Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So this is a very popular snowmobiling location. So because of the possibility that a snowmobile would show up, we had to put the trees around there so that people would know not to go over this hole and kind of have the snowmobile tip into the hole, because that would be a bad day for the snowmobiler. Right. So that's the purpose of those trees there. This is really the hidden world that results from the ice. I can share a link. There's I did in my nascent efforts to try to put some of these videos and photos and stuff out there for public consumption. I do have a YouTube video that I put together of some of the views from under the ice. So I'll shoot the link out at the end of my presentation and discussion. Yeah, let me. I'll put it in at the end, because otherwise everyone's going to go and watch the YouTube video as opposed to listening to me. And we can't have that, right? You got to stay here and have me harangue you for a while longer. And then the other thing I'd say, so I kind of put the same thing of to me, the interesting thing about the ice diving here is exploring the unseen. When you see the video, you can actually see Bob, again, my instructor, actually inverting the traditional view of it, where he's basically able to walk upside down on the ice and from the scuba position. So it's this view that you don't typically see. In theory, as we'll talk about when we get to the deep diving portion, in theory, the cold water is good for viewing wrecks and stuff. What I'd say is there's really no reason that you have to do it under ice other than just general lunacy and the desire to see the hidden things of the ice. So there's it's definitely a limited application type of diving. In terms of practical application, there's a lot that's just sort of being a lunatic about this. We're about to transition to it's true. In the warmer water, basically all the marine life will actually eat the ships. So they're incredibly well preserved ships in particularly the Great Lakes. But you can just go dive on those in the summer when it's a little bit warmer in the water. You don't have to wait. There's nothing to be gained from waiting until it's also covered in a field of ice, other than a little bit of lunacy and stuff. So I have not licked the Edmund Fitzgerald. I think it's a little bit deeper than I would than I'd be able to go, but yeah, there are definitely a surprising number of interesting wrecks up in the Great Lakes. So we're about to kind of flip over to talking about deep diving, which has a lot of similarities, but I wanted to see before we do that if anyone has any questions, anything they want to talk about with the ice diving, anything you want me to delve into in more detail, anything like that, before we move on to talking about the deep diving side of things. And also, if you think of something, you can ask it at the end too. That's fine. Okay, waited just long enough to make it awkward. So there we go. On to the deep section. So, what you see here is a group of folks descending on a line here. Typically, the way this works, right, is that you have a boat that goes out to a wreck site. Typically, you're not just diving in kind of a random location in the water. Typically, for a lot of this diving, particularly the particularly deep diving, you're either doing this because you want to go to a wreck, or potentially there's some scientific applications, but for the people who are just doing this, not for any good reason really, but who are just doing this for kicks. You're typically diving on a shipwreck of some kind, and so what they do is they get an enthusiast. And by the way, enthusiast is a great term for what you all have going on here and related matters, I'd say, because enthusiast, as my friend defined it, is someone who's more into something than they have any right to be. So anyway, typically you get an enthusiast out there who hops on the boat and is kind of weighted down with a big anchor and stuff, and they go over the side first. And because you typically can't get exactly over the wreck, so they go down there and they basically hook on to this wreck so that the boat is there, and then you just have this great line that descends down to the wreck, so you can basically just follow it hand over hand all the way down, and then when it's time to come back up, you can follow it all the way back up. Very easy to do, very straightforward, handles so many safety issues. So of course, tons of people don't do this. I've never figured out why, but a lot of people seem to really enjoy, as you can see, the folks here, the guy who's kind of right at the top of the screen with the light, he's got the right idea, right? Particularly, there's current too, right? So, he's just hanging on to this line and it's super easy. And then for some reason, these other two guys in the photo are just not doing that. And I've really never understood why exactly that is. So my only thought that I can think of is that this has something to do with, technical diving culture, where there is to some degree an element of I want to show folks how hardcore I am, and that I have really good buoyancy skills, and I'll link at the end, but there's a guy who has a really good Twitter thread about the kind of dive culture that grows up of people who look like they're about to go over the side of the boat to invade Grenada or something, and talking about and then the other aspect here is everyone is bragging exactly. Yeah, buoyancy skill test, exactly. The other thing here is everyone is always bragging about how little air they use. It's like there's the dick measuring contest is technically known as sac rate, which, you know, like take that for what it's worth. But the acronym is surface air consumption, and basically with a bunch of math, you can work out your sac rate and determine how much air you consume. So I'm middle of the road, and mine is about 0.6 liters per minute. So like, you know, like you know, you're getting the El Cheapo kind of guy here, right? Like it's not terrible, but it's not great. So kind of like this presentation. So I know, right? Yeah, Erica, it's definitely sac rate. So, yeah, exactly. I suck less air than you, exactly. So, you know, hazards of deep diving. And I figured this picture, which, you know, I'll say on one hand, the guy who was willing to take a picture of me, like, that's a great service and everything. His pictures did kind of suck. So a lot of these pictures are of me. And, but, you know, but to be fair, it's a very challenging photo environment too. So, you know, we can't blame him too much. But I thought this was a good picture to illustrate, because yeah, said no one ever about you know, someone any kind of wetsuit or dry suit, right? The most unflattering items possible. So this kind of illustrates how, you know, you can kind of have your senses very much dulled actually by this. We're first going to talk about oxygen toxicity, and then the one that I understand the least, but to be honest, but seems is kind of the most counterintuitive, is this nitrogen narcosis thing. So like eventually, if you just add enough nitrogen to your system, it ends up having a narcotic effect. And you know, what's funny is that like I didn't really believe in this. Yeah, I mean, so actually, what's funny is many people go to Belize, the Blue Hole in Belize, and it's this big tourist attraction and everything like that. And everyone's like, oh, you got to dive the Blue Hole. And it's a little bit deeper than you're kind of supposed to be doing with just, you know, kind of standard recreational diving practices. But everyone's like, the Blue Hole is exactly what you got to be doing here. They're like, that's the big draw. What's interesting is that everyone loves this and no one remembers it because it's at about 150 feet and they just use compressed air. And that's enough that, like, for most people, that will get you narked enough on the nitrogen that you're probably not going to get in danger from it, but you probably won't really remember the experience too much once you're done with it. And I've definitely had this experience where, you know, I felt like I was good to go. You know, didn't really notice anything at the time, and then looked at the GoPro footage later, and I was like, man, I literally don't remember any of that. So, you know, clearly we were down. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, clearly we were down there doing something or other, and it's all, you know, recorded on video. But but you know, you find out about it later. So yeah, and then the final thing we'll talk about is decompression, which is kind of interesting because I hadn't realized this until I started diving, how much that's actually like a term that's in the lexicon, and it's like it's just sort of accepted as a thing, right? You know, people talk about like, oh, I gotta, you know, take a few days off of work to decompress and everything like that. And once you start looking for it, this scuba diving analogy shows up absolutely everywhere. There is for anyone who wants to delve more into the surprisingly interesting kind of science of decompression, there is a phenomenal YouTube video out there by a New Zealand anesthesiologist named Simon Mitchell, and I've got that on the slides on the last page of kind of references and stuff that you can go to. Yeah, I'll put it in the link. It's quite good, and it kind of goes into this whole discussion of like how does decompression actually work, which we'll talk a little bit about here. So anyway, enough on just the overview for the deep diving slide. So here's the scary math portion of this, and this is also where we're probably going to discover that I made a math error in the process of putting this slide together. But yeah, so at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is oxygen toxicity. And this, you know, in my attempt to tenuously link my bizarre hobbies into what Erica actually asked me to talk about, the hidden worlds type of thing. Oh, there we go. Geronimo's coming over here. So he's finally gotten into this. So you may see an appearance shortly. so we've got here is this oxygen toxicity issue, right? And I thought that was an interesting topic for this hidden worlds idea, because like the gas that we all need for life actually becomes toxic at certain points in this, and you start ending up having to do planning here. And the way I'd loosely kind of phrase it, this isn't 100% accurate, but close enough, is that with deep diving, a lot of the hazards that you're dealing with are actually kind of invisible, hidden world kind of hazards, and stuff that actually is a danger that you can't really see in front of you, and that you kind of need to think about more from that. So that's where I thought that the tenuous link to hidden worlds comes into play. So let's say we're thinking about how we're going to do a deep dive here. So we go to the local scuba shop. Blue Octopus Scuba is one in Alexandria, Virginia that I use a lot, recommended. That's where I get my gas fills. And let's say you go to them and you say, "Hello, Blue Octopus. I would like, here's my scuba tank. Please fill this with air such that I can then go take this on a scuba dive and I can go breathe this underwater." So they will say, yeah, Takabamba, also a good recommendation. So they will fill it with just the air around here, which is about 21% oxygen, and then 78% nitrogen and 1% other. So they'll then push that into the they have a fancy apparatus that that compresses that into those tanks. So you then get those tanks on your back, attach all the gear and everything like that, and then hop in the water and start descending. So your lungs, and by the way, one thing I'd throw out here that's very counterintuitive to a lot of people is that your body actually has no pressure, direct pressure sensor. What you can detect is pressure changes. So that's like your ears popping, things like that. Yeah, but you actually can't feel any pressure. Like you can be under, you can have a ton of pressure surrounding your body, but because it's surrounding your body from all directions, you actually feel no difference, and there's no sensation of being deeper from the pressure. It's purely just like the ears popping. That's a clue that you've changed depths somehow. But that's about that. So you end up descending, and because your lungs need the gas to be delivered at the ambient pressure in order for it all to work, for your body to be able to process it. Once you get in the water, let's say you descend down to 33 feet, you're now at 2 atmospheres, so double the normal pressure that you feel on the surface. So your ears pop a whole bunch. You get down there, and then with this equation up top, so we still got the 21% oxygen that's in the cylinders, and we've now got 2 atmospheres of pressure that we're working with. So that means, again, this partial pressure that we're dealing with is now 0.42. So then you keep descending down to 66 feet. So every 33 feet, you get another atmosphere of pressure. That takes you up to 0.63 on this partial pressure of oxygen measure, PPO2. Descend down to 99 feet and you're up to 0.84. So, and we can go into this later, but for right now, let's just assume that we got the numbers basically correct. But basically a point here, this partial pressure of oxygen, which is really a way of measuring how many molecules of oxygen are going into your lungs. So long exegesis, why did we spend so much time talking about this calculation? The answer is because at some point this becomes dangerous. So if you get over 1.4 on this PPO2 measure, you can actually, with no warning, have a convulsion and pass out and drown. So there's a handful of potential warnings that can result from that can come in advance of this. Tinnitus, some degree of vertigo, dizziness, etc. As someone who has tinnitus on a daily basis, that's not diagnostic for me at all. But yeah, so it's you're not immediately kind of facing a hazard at the moment. Like if you get to 1.4, you're not suddenly going to die from it, but the more that number goes up, the more and more risk you face. And so another reference that I'll talk about in the references here, there's a good book called Shadow Divers which is kind of about a lot of this wreck diving culture off New Jersey. Really, really good book. And in there, the interesting thing was this problem was completely not understood at the time. And instead it was literally just like, well, you know, Johnny died and we don't know why. He just passed out underwater and, you know, and he died. So the term was deep water blackout. And it was just this poorly understood phenomenon. And it wasn't until much later that they determined, oh yeah, actually you really need that number to be under 1.4 that we hadn't really calculated before. So, and then on the other hand, so then, you know, as you can see kind of in the discussion there, that means that if you adopting this 1.4 figure, air starts to become, so compressed air starts to become unsafe at about 187 feet. So if you want to go deeper than that, you actually need to start reducing the percentage of oxygen below what's in the air. So typically you add helium to that mixture. In theory, you could add nitrogen, but that's going to create some problems down the road. But so usually people add some helium in here. It's funny, you know, my thought on this was always like, won't that make your voice sound funny? And never really experienced that, bizarrely enough. But there's a limit to how much you can put in there, how much, because then if you go below 0.16, then your body starts to not have enough oxygen to be able to actually, you know, continue life. So, and the other interesting thing is your body actually has no oxygen sensors directly. For most people, you can't actually detect low oxygen. You can detect high carbon dioxide. So when you have that feeling of drowning, it's actually not because you have too little oxygen, it's because you have more and more carbon dioxide building up in your system that creates that feeling of drowning, asphyxia, etc. So you actually, yeah, no, it's very concerning, Geronimo. So you actually end up having this situation where you can just pass out with no warning. So you also want to avoid that. So both of these are essentially hazards that are very, very insidious. There's very little warning before they occur. And really the only way to mitigate them is to pre-plan and kind of make sure that you've done all the calculations correctly and make sure that you've got multiple gas mixtures that are appropriate for the different portions of the dive. So Erica's question, right? Why not nitrogen? So, and you know, flip it to why helium. So once again, if you have more and more nitrogen in the system, then you actually get this narcotic effect. And the other interesting thing about it is that helium is a nitrous oxide. Yeah. So if you as you go deeper and deeper, it actually becomes harder and harder to breathe because that is one area where you won't necessarily feel it, but you can kind of end up with a situation where if the gas mixture is fairly dense, the carbon dioxide just sort of sits at the bottom of your lungs, and your body, being kind of lazy, just sort of like recycles the gas on the very top, and you end up with more and more carbon dioxide building up, and you end up kind of like in this weird situation where you're like panicking because you're feeling like you're drowning, but you don't know why. So you end up with this situation, and it's kind of like typically. So I'll say this has happened to me once, and it's been kind of like because I actually dropped my camera, and because it wasn't secured properly to me. Then I went down after it, and then like, you know, as soon as I hit the bottom just like completely silted out around me, so I couldn't see anything. And then like, so you start breathing faster and like getting concerned about things, and then like, you know, it's kind of very much one of these situations where like once something starts to go wrong, you can get this cascading failure type of situation. Things can kind of go off the rails. So I had to like basically react to that by switching to a much easier to breathe gas, and it was amazing how quickly that just like calmed me down, and I was good to go. But yeah. It's surprising how like a small thing going wrong that shouldn't have any direct impact on safety can kind of get you, yeah, very concerning, can get you into this into situations like this. The other reason not to put in more nitrogen is because nitrogen is an inert, so any inert gas will be taken up by the tissues in your body, and then much like if you shake up a a soda bottle, right? If you release the gas, then you see all these bubbles, all these bubbles form if there's a sudden drop in pressure. So that actually happens in your bloodstream if you've been down too long and you've built up a ton of nitrogen in your system. So literally through a highly scientific process of having junior personnel in the U.S. Navy do this a whole bunch of times. They actually figured out where the safe and unsafe limits are, exactly. And then from there, they were able to create decompression tables, and then from there, there's now basically you can put a computer on your wrist, and yeah, exactly, law of fuck over plebes, exactly. So you can put a computer on your wrist that that will continuously calculate this and let you know basically when are you in the safe range. Now, this is completely experimentally determined. It's for an average person, and there is no way to guarantee that you will be completely safe from this. It purely is just kind of trying to decide what the acceptable risk is. And actually, that YouTube video I mentioned, Dr. Simon Mitchell kind of gets into if you really want to go down that YouTube rabbit hole, man, there's a lot of interesting videos on, like, there's one very controversial in the diving community that's actually literally titled "Decompression Controversies." And it gets down to this question of what algorithm you should use to determine how quickly you want to ascend. So the key point here, though, right, is that you really need to be able to stay down long enough to have that pressure be relieved very slowly so that you don't get that bubbling effect. Yeah, this is the bends, exactly. So from that, much like with the ice diving we were talking about before, you want to have multiple sources of breathing gas, and then be able to have those available so that if there's a failure on one, then you can kind of go to a backup there. And same thing, you typically have a computer, and then you typically have a backup computer too. And some people go really crazy with the backups, and there's all sorts of discussion about how many backups you want to have. Yeah, so great question. How many tanks does a deep diver have to take down? So it completely depends on the situation. So pretty much, minimum 2, because you want to have, you want to have 1 and then a spare. So you're for a technical dive like this, and for this, we would call it a dive exceeding the no decompression limits. So no decompression limits are kind of what you do in reasonable scuba diving, I'd say, where you're basically going down, and the nice thing about that is that you're always able to safely ascend directly to the surface, as long as you don't go very fast, but you don't have to like do these decompression stops and just wait at places in the water. If you're doing deeper dives where you are required to do those decompression stops, then pretty much minimum 2. It starts to get out of hand pretty quickly if you go deeper and deeper, because the other issue, right, is that there's a limited number of molecules of whatever you're breathing gas in your tanks, and as you go deeper, for a given amount of time, you're using more of those. Because again, like, your lungs have to work at whatever the ambient pressure is. So as the pressure it goes higher and higher, you're actually using up more of that gas in your tanks. So when you start getting down into like the 300-foot range or so, then you're talking about like needing minimum 4 or 5 tanks just to like be able to kind of do a dive with potentially the kind of minimum safety margins. Also needing different mixtures to go at different levels. So instead, and the other point about this too, right, is that when you breathe in that gas, your body uses about 4% of the gas mixture to convert that. So for each tank, you need a different mixture, and depending on the dive profile you're planning on doing. So it quickly can get out of hand with this. So what people actually do on this, and you're actually wasting most of the gas, because when you take in a breath, You use about 4% of that, which goes into your body for oxygen, and the rest you just exhale. And then if you're exhaling it in the water, it just goes up to the surface. So about 96% of the gas you brought with you is just completely wasted. So it's very inefficient. So, and if you dig into that that Simon Mitchell video that I'll link in there towards the end here, what he actually talks about is that the entire community has moved to a concept called a closed circuit rebreather, where you're basically using a very sophisticated means of breathing into and out of a bag. And then attached to the bag is a thing that removes the carbon dioxide and injects the appropriate amount of oxygen and injects the appropriate amount of a different gas, so that like you maintain everything there. So it's typically there's a lot of like, basically computers are really cheap nowadays, and so this is an option for a lot of this. And there are extensive holy wars in the technical diving community about like which rebreather is the best to use. Do you want like a fully manual one or a fully electronic one, and so on. So and that gets into a lot of this technical diving culture. So typically what people do is they're basically carrying this closed circuit rebreather, which is, depending on where you get it. If you get it from a Facebook group used, it could be as little as $2,000 for that, and then people are paying like 15 to 20 grand for the higher end models. So some people go really down the rabbit holes here. So that's kind of the direction that people go with that. That does bring up another aspect of technical diving culture, which is like the obsession with the gear and the kind of deep connection there. And then people are realistically gearheads. Anyone who's kind of getting into this. Yeah, so typically for this kind of diving, for liability reasons, and because of the degree of personalization, they typically will not rent you the gear. But on the other hand, it will be, typically this is a specialized enough activity that you're typically working like with an individual instructor. They don't really have a lot of like generic classes. It's like you have a relationship with a particular instructor who has a particular philosophy about doing things. And they may have some gear that they can kind of loan you to get you it, and like, so you don't have to spend all the money on something where you may end up deciding like, actually that was stupid, I want to go a different direction. Like I've decided that this faith in the rebreather community, I don't believe the theological foundations of this faith, and I actually want to go with this other faith. You don't necessarily have to spend a ton of money to do that. So so why would you do this? Another good question, right? Why would anyone do this? At the end of the day, some ships do not have the decency to sink in shallow enough waters. At the end of the day, like, typically for various reasons, you're diving on wrecks. That's where the interesting marine life is. That's where the interesting wrecks are. And, like sometimes they don't sink in less than 130 feet of water. So now you could, it's potentially open to a reasonable question about like, well, there's plenty that did, so maybe we could just dive those. And yeah, if you're a reasonable person, 100% agree. You'll see more. Light penetrates better in shallower depths. You get much better photos. Typically, you see much more interesting marine life because even dumb fish are smarter than a lot of technical divers, and understand that like the shallower depths have a lot going for them. And there's kind of like a range of depths where once you start getting deeper than like 130 feet or so, and then shallower than like a few thousand feet, we don't actually have as much scientific research going on in those depths because it's below where kind of reasonable scuba diving typically occurs. And it's above where, like, if you're going to go to all the effort to get into a submarine, then you probably want to go deeper. So there ends up being this kind of like middle strata, which is a kind of a new area of scientific research on these depths that's starting to be opened up actually by this kind of revolution in closed circuit rebreathers that's making it much more feasible to do dives to these depths. There's also another little tidbit. I mentioned helium. Helium works really great for ensuring that, like, you know, you have a breathable gas at these depths and everything like that. Helium is incredibly expensive. so you start getting very quickly into this dangerous world of like, well, if I just do 50 of these dives, then the rebreather pays for itself, right? So that's a direction that people start going down pretty quickly. And then, like I mentioned before, with the ice diving section, another thing that actually is you know, sounds kind of terrible, but the cold and the dark, while maybe not pleasant, it does keep these wrecks really well preserved. So this is me on a wreck called the Indiana up in Lake Erie. And this is actually cheating a little bit because this was, I think this is about 95 feet or so of depth, but we did a long dive. So, you know, it's a lot of the same problems, but, you know, it's not technically about this, but whatever. Like I said, you're getting the bargain basement for this presentation. So it is what it is. This ship actually was shipping granite, as you can see, on the Great Lakes. And at the time, they didn't have a rule that you couldn't load the ship with rocks so heavily that you couldn't close the hatches. So at some point, a big wave came over it and a bunch of water came in, and then they were like, oh crap, we should have been able to close that hatch. And so now it's a great diveable wreck where it has all this granite on it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like I feel like we could have seen this coming, but apparently people didn't for some reason. So yeah, what you see there in that picture, like you've got this great wreck, and then like I mentioned, you've got the I've got on my back. So this kind of like ties a lot of these thoughts together, right? Wearing a dry suit in cold water, diving on this wreck. The equipment that you're seeing on my back in this photo is a closed circuit rebreather. And then on the side, you see the bailout bottle. So if the closed circuit rebreather fails, you have that redundant source of gas. And it's hard to see in the photo. Actually, I have a different one on my left side there. And so the one on the left side is basically to get up to a shallow depth. And the one on the right side is designed for, it's a high oxygen mixture that makes the decompression go much faster. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So here's some of those resources I mentioned. I can send links out here to, yeah, so for the first one, like I said, if you really want to go down the YouTube rabbit hole here, shockingly good videos by this guy, Simon Mitchell, this anesthesiologist in New Zealand. The video is called Operational Aspects of Technical Diving, and I'll send that out. And he kind of goes into, like, you know, he kind of works out all the math about, like, once again, like, at the, you know, the bottom line is like, yeah, if you're doing these deep dives, it's gonna get out of hand pretty quickly. And so this is why everyone goes to closed circuit rebreathers. And by the way, the audience here is for his YouTube video is actually doctors who might have to deal with patients who have come up from bizarrely extreme dives and have really weird physiological symptoms associated with doing some of these more extreme dives. So it's a pretty fascinating YouTube video. And then he actually has, there's a bunch of others, presentations that he's given that are pretty interesting. Shadow Divers by Robert Kurson, really good book. To give you a sense of like how intense this book is, I don't know if you all saw the movie Apollo 13 about, you know, the spaceship that went around the moon and like had a SAD and they had a bunch of problems and stuff. So the real life commander of that mission, Jim Lovell, later, so, you know, you'd think that would be a pretty, you know, you'd have a pretty high bar for like intensity of life and so on. He actually said that he skipped, he feigned being sick so he could drive around a parking lot and finish the audiobook of Shadow Divers because it was so intense. Yes, I see where he's coming from with that recommendation. And he actually then had the author write a book about his other space mission, the first flight that did a circumnavigation around the moon, because he was like, this guy's a great writer. So like that book is pretty phenomenal. And the book is about these guys who get completely obsessed with trying to figure out this unknown German U-boat that was sunk off the coast of New Jersey, and they've dived on it. It's in like 250 feet. They're doing all these dives on it, and they cannot figure out which U-boat it was. And the records are all messed up. A bunch of people die and all their marriages get destroyed by this obsession with trying to figure out what the deal is with this U-boat. But it's about these people who kind of get obsessed. And there's for people who have seen it, The Life Aquatic with the Bill Murray movie is one of my favorite Wes Anderson movies. Well, it's my favorite Wes Anderson movie, one of my favorite movies generally. And the story has the Shadow Divers has this very like Steve Zissou versus Hennessy type feel to it, where there's like the scrappy guys who have this like really bare bones boat. The boat captain is a complete alcoholic. Spoiler, he actually dies of alcoholism midway through the book, and they have to find another captain. And then there's like the really well-funded operation going, and they're like completely at odds with each other. And what's funny is the second guy actually advertises on his website as seen in Shadow Divers. And it's like, dude, you were the villain of that book. But like, he's all about, whatever. All publicity is good publicity, right? So, it kind of gets to more of this technical diving culture of like these cliques that grow up around these different things. Actually, many of the same events are covered in a different book called The Last Dive by Bernie Chowdhury. Bernie Chowdhury also on one of these dives. And by the way, kind of over the connected to a lot of this is the wreck of the Andrea Doria. So everyone go back and watch that Seinfeld episode now about that. But the Andrea Doria is this this Italian ocean liner, and it sank in like 250 feet of water, and it's been kind of viewed as the Mount Everest of technical diving in a lot of cases. And people got obsessed with it. Had this really nice fine china on board, so people would get obsessed with like taking bags down to this and just bringing back as many pounds of fine china as they could take off this wreck. And it was incredibly dangerous, and like 18 people have died doing this. So in that sense, it's also kind of the Mount Everest of technical diving too, right? In that just tons of people have died doing this. So both books have this extended discussion of people who have really died in horrific ways on the Andrea Doria. Bernie Chowdhury himself, I can't actually remember offhand if this was the Andrea Doria, but he was doing one of these deep technical dives and basically put his backup tanks. This was kind of before the era of closed circuit rebreathers. So he had a bunch of these tanks, and like it's a huge pain if you want to have all these tanks like carry them around with you. So what people do is they would put them in a particular place and then come back to it and then just have them for the ascent and descent. So he actually got lost, couldn't find those tanks, ended up having to surface where he had 2 hours. He was supposed to do 2 hours of decompression, and instead had to go directly to the surface and had a brutal case of the bends, which he barely survived. And he details the whole thing in his book. Also a very intense book, really good book though. Couple dive shops that I've worked a ton with and have a great time with. Blue Octopus Scuba, they're in Alexandria, pretty close to Del Rey. Great operation there. They're good there. I will say that actually, I would have a divide between reasonable, not reasonable. The owner of Blue Octopus Scuba, who actually trained me in my first scuba diving, he oversaw a new instructor who actually did the teaching, but the owner's name is on my very first dive certification card. Actually died on a technical dive a couple of years ago to about 250 feet. So it is certainly a risky activity, but I should say 99% of their business is much more reasonable diving that comes with much less risk. Narked, there's this whole phenomenon of divey people. Narked is actually a guy who you can PayPal some money and he will teach you technical diving. So his name is Dev Spradlin, and he's a retired Marine, and he just has a tax scheme going. So you can PayPal him some money and he'll hook you up with technical diving training. And so I always tell people, I'm like, this is really sketchtacular, but he's a great instructor, and he did all my kind of initial technical diving training. He really, I've learned a ton from him. and really high standards. It's just, the PayPal thing is very weird, but also kind of fitting for a lot of the dive community. And then Scuba North, that's Bob Thorpe, the guy who's in a lot of these photos of the ice diving and stuff, is the owner of that. They're up in Michigan, so unless you have some reason to be up there or you're just a lunatic and want to do this, you're probably not going to encounter them. But yeah, Bob has done a ton of my technical diving training, and like I said, right, there's a particular religion associated with these things, and there's a particular religion around closed circuit rebreather diving that there's a guy in Minnesota who's kind of the prophet of that, and then Bob is one of his disciples, and that's kind of the faith that I'm in. So loosely affiliated with that. And then because they're in Michigan and they have nothing to do except crazy shit in the winter, they do also do the ice diving there. So that's a lot of me prattling on about all this. Questions? Did anything not make sense? Anything you want to discuss? Please go crazy with the questions.
So what was your first scuba diving experience, and then how did that transition in? I think, did you tell that story at the beginning, just wanting to do ice diving, going for all the really obscure certifications, or was there a period of time where first you were doing scuba diving and then you wanted to go do the obscure stuff? Yeah.
So
are you still with that partner?
I am still with that partner. She's in the other room actually, and is undoubtedly chuckling about what's what she's overhearing here. And she correctly assesses that I have a profound need for external validation. So if there's more certifications, obviously I'm going to do that, right? So she and by the way, she has also done a lot of the technical training, but she's fully qualified closed circuit rebreather diver, has done all that too, but enjoys reasonable diving.
She's not dumb enough to actually do it.
Exactly. Yes. She prefers to do it. So that's the thing. Another thing you can do with a closed circuit rebreather is fish can get really close to you, and you can take great photos and stuff because you're not producing all those bubbles. So there are other applications that make a lot more sense if you're not kind of a lunatic. So then on the other hand, I am a lunatic, and so we have all these phenomenal photos, all sorts of phenomenal good photos of diving that I'm not showing here because this is about the lunacy side. But yeah, I can send some of the links to that. So we got into that, dove in Indonesia some. Indonesia is phenomenal for diving. It's the best coral, fish, anything like that I've ever seen. Surprisingly, North Carolina is actually not bad too. It's a lot of good stuff there. The weather is a challenge there, but yeah. So they have there is a lot of kind of cool stuff there too. So that's kind of the what I would actually recommend people do. Yeah, at some point I heard that ice diving was a thing, and I was like, well, obviously I got to do that. Because it's just it sounded crazy, so I was like, I'm in. And then from there it was kind of a slippery slope. The instructor who had originally taught me was like, hey, I've got this I'm switching to a different rebreather. Do you want to try out rebreather diving? And I was like, hell yeah, brother. So hopped on that bandwagon. So yeah. Thanks Nancy. Catch you later. Yeah, Tony, that's also a really good book. So definitely second Tony's recommendation there. And there's kind of more technical books too that if anyone's interested, I can recommend. But yeah, the book that Tony recommended in the chat is really good. And one thing I'd say, we talked a little bit about other certifications I've been involved in. One thing I'd say is that the safety culture in diving is far less mature than in other kind of high risk industries. I'd say aviation is where it's kind of the most developed, maybe a little bit too much. They have you memorize things about if you detect that you're having a macho thought, you're supposed to say taking chances is foolish to yourself, and that's supposed to fix it. Clearly this process was designed by an engineer, but anyway, the technical diving community is 30 years behind where the aviation community is in terms of this safety process. Yeah, and I'm happy to share some photos. The other thing I'd say, in addition to the Indonesia dives that I talked about, is if you go down to North Carolina, you can actually dive with sharks, which sounds very intense. These are the most chill sharks that anyone has ever encountered. They're called sand tiger sharks, which, like, oh man, tiger's in the name, right? It's got to be aggressive. Yeah, these are the world's most chill sharks. I don't think there's ever been definitive proof that a sand tiger shark has ever killed a person. I have personally witnessed a clueless diver kick one in the face as it was swimming by, and the shark was just like, "What the hell, man? I'm just trying to swim here," right? And so I have a whole video that was probably 70% shot by Jen up on YouTube that I can send here, that has kind of video of what it's like to swim with the sharks. And that's absolutely a dive where, if you go down to North Carolina, with kind of, you don't need to go crazy with scuba certifications or anything like that. You can have that experience very readily with just heading down to North Carolina on a good weather day, and they'll take you out there. I'm going to stop sharing just to so I can pull up some of these YouTube links and send them in the chat. But if you have any questions about, so everyone take a moment to kind of write down the references that you're interested in, and then I'll stop sharing. But then I can actually share some links in the chat. Okay, stopping sharing.